Well, I'm so glad to have you here, Don, because I saw that article and I started chewing on it and it started getting stuck in my craw, and I needed to either have you come talk me off the ledge or help me process it in a meaningful way. And just to set up things for listeners, recently on fastcompany.com, there was a blog post or an article post by someone who shall remain nameless, and its title was very simple: You are not a brand. Now, that gets my attention right away because, as you know, much of what this podcast and Nonfiction Brandversity is all about is helping people develop their personal brands so that they can command a bigger place in the market, to really let people know who they are, what they do, and how they do it, to get all the benefits of the century of brand expertise that has been developed and used by companies for everything from cornflakes to corrugated paper, and apply it to themselves. And so this article, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just read a couple of bites from it that got my attention. Sadly, being quietly great at your job sucks. No one is going to pick you out of the crowd when a significant role opens up. Well, this is part of the setup of the article. And I'm like, yeah, you're making the argument for creating a personal brand right there, because to quote the quote, being quietly great at your job sucks. And so part of what personal branding is about is maybe getting a little bit more loud about what you do at your job so that people actually do recognize what you do. Do you have any thoughts about this article before I go too far with it?
Yeah, the article is an interesting one because basically, the thesis to me was that you can't be and you shouldn't be a personal brand. That brand is a dirty word, that it's impossible to be a brand, and it shouldn't, even if you wanted to try to aspire to be a personal brand, you shouldn't. Yet, as you pointed out, with that little passage, that's kind of counter to the argument that the author makes. And one of the things I think is really important that I got out of that is that, I think the title was written specifically to create a reaction.
Oh, and it did.
It did. And it got shared because of that, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Right? We're talking about it because of that.
Exactly. So, got to be careful of the sensationalized level of the title. But what the author then talks about is this idea of ethos, and talks about how Aristotle had these principles of being true to yourself. It's basically they're mincing words, in my opinion. Because if you look at the way brand is defined by that person, they define it as something that's fake and contrived to try to make people think you or your company are something that you're not. And that is the exact opposite of what people like you and I talk about. And a lot of the people who are thought leaders in the personal branding space is that you need to be who you are for the people that you serve. And you need to stand up for that. You don't need to be in people's faces or anything like that. But people want to, especially if you look at, like, Mark Schaefer wrote a great book that came out not too long ago called The Marketing Rebellion. And if you look at what millennial and Gen Zers want, is they want to know who they're interacting with. Not just a nameless, faceless company, but who are the people behind it? What does it stand for? And the example that I like to give, and it's also in the book, is about Colin Kaepernick. And Colin Kaepernick's a lightning rod in the United States, at least, in terms of sports, because he would kneel during the national anthem. And Nike took a stance on supporting Colin Kaepernick. And a whole bunch of people ended up in the United States doing these protests and burning shoes and all that. But those were all Gen Xers and older for the most part.
Which made Nike, the rebel brand, go up. I mean, literally, I watched their stock price go up after those events, and suddenly a brand that was getting a little old, a little extra crispy, had brand new youth and rebel relevance.
And exactly. And those young people said, hey, they stand for something that I believe in. So, and again, it doesn't have to be a controversial stance like that, but when that author talks about you aren't a brand, yeah, we are. We all have things that we value, and it doesn't have to be, again, a controversial topic, but the idea of people want to know who they are hiring, whether it's as an employee or as a business. They want to know, what is this person about? Are they going to be able to do the job? Do I want to work with them? Am I going to like them? And we're moving much more away. And again, Mark Schaefer talks about this in the book, from just a transactional economy to an economy that we used to have before, which is the people who are the purchasers or listeners or consumers, they want to believe in who they're consuming, purchasing from, listening to. And if they don't have shared values, then they're just a commoditized product that's going to get ignored.
Well, and I want to invite any listener to go ahead and go to fastcompany.com and search for "You Are Not a Brand." Read the article and form your own opinions, because the thing I've learned a long time ago is the loudest person in the room may believe 100% in what they're saying, but they could be 100% wrong. So much so that I like to point to another article from Fast Company from August 1997 by a guy named Tom Peters, and it was called "The Brand Called You." And this is literally the second place I think Tom Peters wrote about his concept of personal branding, and it was in Fast Company. So here we are, a couple of decades later, and all of a sudden, branding is a negative word that when applied to you. And if you read the article, the "You Are Not a Brand" article, I'm glad you picked up on what I did too, which was he was substituting Aristotle's concept of ethos for what we have been talking about, especially when it comes to nonfiction branding. Because I agree with them 100%. A fictional brand based on whatever you think you should be is absolutely 100% wrong. But a true nonfiction brand that is completely you, completely true, is exactly what we're talking about. And, it's the philosophy that both you and I are trying to attract acolytes to because we believe so strongly in it. And again, you can go back to the previous 51 episodes of the Nonfiction Brand podcast, and you'll hear the arguments made over and over and over again of why it's necessary.
And one thing that I would just quick point out is, and I was thinking of this as I was reading the article, is why do we remember Aristotle? Because he was known as a brand, essentially.
Right. He was the first brand in philosophy.
Exactly.
In Western philosophy.
Because he was who he was. He didn't try to be something he wasn't, but that's what made him a thought leader. Plus, he created the content to become that thought leader that got recorded, and he recorded some of it himself. And he was a brand,
And so he remains a brand.
Absolutely.
That is still relevant centuries later or millennia later.
Yeah.
Well, there's another quote from the article that I just want to point to. "The goal is learning how to clearly communicate your style, capabilities, and impact authentically, which opens opportunities to do the best work of your career." How is that not nonfiction branding, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast?
And that's, to me, it's just simple nomenclature. The author just substituted the word ethos and brand. And again, I think there are people who, think of marketing as spinning, and there's people who think of marketing as a way of truly serving people and helping. And it's what your intention is. And I think the way the author tried to set that up was that, branding is not like the way we've defined it in the community that listens to this podcast. It's something that, again, is manufactured, fake, to get people to think, to like you, essentially. And that's not at all what it's about.
Well, and here's the tell. Again, we're on the same wavelength, Don. The subhead below the title, and I don't know if the author wrote this, perhaps it was an editor or a headline writer, but it was, "Personal branding is meaningless. Plus, it sounds gross. Here's how to communicate your value without selling out." The key words I want to point to or underline are selling out. How many times have we heard, "Man, that band sold out," or that band that you loved when it was only you and 5 other people listening? The second they get a record deal and they start caring about something, selling something to the audience, all of a sudden you, the original gangsta of that band, are pissed because they're selling out. My argument to people who say, "Oh, I hate advertising," or "Oh, I hate marketing," is, "Oh, you must not have anything to sell." Because let me tell you, if you have a $500,000 house that you would love to sell so you can go do the things you want to do, what are you begging your realtor to do? Can you market this better? Can you advertise it? Can you come do open houses? Can you attach things to carrier pigeons? Let people know about this. Please let them know. And if you're that rock band that now has merch to sell. What do you want your label to do? Hey, can you get us more advertising? Can you market us? We now have something to sell. And by the way, I hate to say this, but if you as a person don't think you have to sell yourself, you're not living in the modern world. And frankly, I don't know how you got a job in the first place, because every job interview you go on is a sales transaction. Hi, I'm presenting something. I'm proffering something to you.
Yes.
Would you like to buy it?
Well, same thing. And the same thing applies to dating, to friendships. And I'll actually take it a little bit further, because I have the social media course that I teach at the University of Wisconsin. I have a lot of science students, including PhD science students. And I had a veterinarian student who is like, marketing's a total bunch of BS. It's all about being manipulative, et cetera. And I said, oh, that's great. You know, that's what you want to believe. So tell me right now, does my dog need to take this medication or that medication? Or is this type of medication for this condition, you know, made up? And they started pitching their belief and their idea. And I said, what are you doing right now? You're trying to sell me a veterinary solution to, because their take was, well, a medical intervention in this case of Lyme's and potential Lyme's disease is something that you would want to do, and blah, 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 blah. I said, what you're doing there is you're marketing. You're trying to convince me that what you believe in, and you truly believe it, but that solution is right. Where somebody might tell me that there's a natural option. No, the natural options won't work. The natural options aren't as good as this. And I'm like, well, wait a second. You just told me that, you know, that our marketing is about trying to convince people to do things that aren't in their best interest. And now you're kind of pitching me to purchase this medication for my dogs. Well, this is different because it's for your benefit. And I just had to smile and laugh. I'll get that with nonprofits too. Well, they'll say, we're not selling anything. I said, really? You're not trying to let people understand the problems with human trafficking, as an example, and why they should donate or why they should care or why they should. So it isn't selling to manipulate. It's about creating awareness. And I think when you make that shift of letting people know with your personal brand, it's not about selling yourself so much as it is making people aware of the value you can bring to them, whether as an employee, as a consultant, as a solopreneur, whatever it is. If you're not willing to do that, the world's not going to know you exist. And that's one of that quote that you started with from that article that says it sucks when people don't know who you are. So how do they get to know you?
Exactly. This episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by Nonfiction Brandversity. It's a free Facebook group dedicated to the art and craft of personal branding, and we'd like to invite you. Just search Nonfiction Brandversity on Facebook and ask to join. You're in, guaranteed. I can't wait to see you on campus. My beef with the writer is that I agree on 70% of what he's written. Mm-hmm. And I think he's done a really nice job because he's really laid out the arguments for having a good, personal, nonfiction, authentic, completely true, completely you brand. But here's a quote directly from the article that I highlighted because I think it captures a bias. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to run this past you, Don, to get your take on it. The idea of personal brand sounds phony because it is. Brands are carefully contrived. They are not real. Brands are flat, soulless, and artificial personalities designed to convince others that the brand is something that it is not. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, the guy you just described could have said that.
Yep.
And probably did in slightly different words. But to me, this is throwing out the personal brand baby with the bad tasting false brand bathwater. And we all know brands that say they're one thing and they're not. You know, my favorite argument for people is there's a certain big box retail store chain based out of Bentonville, Arkansas. And they come into a small rural town, build a big box outside of town where the land is cheap. They're just outside the tax district. Half the time they're in a tax incentive district, a TIF district. And then they take all the economic activity out of that town. Mm-hmm. Is that a bad brand? I would say no, because they are exactly what they say out loud every day, which is low prices every day. Yep. They know who they are and they are being it. They are providing customers with the lowest price on Chinese underwear or American branded underwear that was made in China, and people flock to them. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the small town main square is empty of retail Is that a mistake because of that brand? Again, I don't like it, but that brand is being true to their brand foundation. Their brand foundation is not, we help rural communities stay strong. It's low prices every day. And by the way, you're going to come and bring us your business regardless. What's funny to me is watching mega brands duke it out in the form of Bentonville and Seattle. You know, the guys who are on a certain .com that starts with an A, ends with an N. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. These guys are literally in a blood sport fight to the bottom. But I will argue that Mr. Bezos' version is more successful because they've taken all the friction out of the transactions. And especially if you're a AN Prime member, both brands are brutal, but they're completely aligned with their brand foundation. Do you have to be a manipulative figure like that to be a good personal brand? No, you don't. And I can point to one that we've talked about in the past that we both follow, Pat Flynn.
Oh yeah, Pat's awesome.
Pat Flynn is, hi guys. He almost looks, he does not have a voice for radio. His face is for radio. You know, he's not a bad looking guy or anything like that, but nothing about him screams media personality.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. He gets on there and he provides value all day long.
Yes.
And he's a giver. I've never paid a cent for the quality input content ideas that I get from Pat Flynn. And yet he keeps giving me them. So much so that if I find an opportunity to throw him some bucks, whether he writes a new book or something like that, I'm going to do it.
Absolutely.
Because it's a drop in the bucket for all the goodness he's given me. Oh, and by the way, he's a personal brand. He's he'll never be a true household name. But he's a household name with anybody who's paying attention to the social space, the online marketing space, the digital marketing space, and even the architectural green certification space.
And if you look at his financials, which he posts on his site, it's Smart Passive Income, he's doing pretty well. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because with Pat Flynn, when it comes to the big box stores, just want to kind of tap on that a little bit, because that business that's based out of Bentonville, Arkansas, was very different in its philosophical values when its original owner ran it. And when he passed away, I mean, not that it was perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it had some level of ethics that have since disappeared in the name of profit. For me, what that tells me as a consumer is that that doesn't align with my values, so I'm not going to shop there.
And that's a key thing on branding, which is branding from its very beginning was about one thing, and that is differentiation. Hey, you've got brown cattle over there. I've got brown cattle over here. How do we tell them apart? I know, I'm going to brand mine with a branding iron. That way you can tell which are yours and which is mine. Well, as a consumer, branding was about differentiation because, well, I like this soda because I like the flavor profile better. It comes in a red package. Oh, the blue one, I don't like as much. So if I'm going to a store, I'm not even reading the packages. I'm looking and seeing the packaging, the color. I differentiate, grab the red one, put it in my cart, move on, not even thinking. Because I know what the value proposition is and that it jibes with what I'm looking for. It's about differentiation.
And that's one of the things I'll often do when I'm doing my workshops or keynotes is I actually have two different video clips that I talk about when it comes to thinking about successful personal brands and really learning who you are. And I think trying to build a profile of who you are really helps you discover who you are and what you stand for. I think a lot of times you discover it not out of an aha moment, but more like we're all a marble slab and we chip away the things that we aren't and we figure out who we are and what it is that we stand for. And the two examples that I'll do as a comparison is I'll play one video that's an introduction of Gary Vaynerchuk, often known as Gary V. And as Gary V's going on, he's talking about why he wants you to subscribe to his YouTube channel, and he's cursing and he's doing this and doing that and doing this, very New York, New Jersey guy. And then I'll counter that and I'll play a video that is a Pat Flynn when Pat Flynn was at an introduction to non-subscribers to his YouTube channel. I'll play those two clips back to back and I'll ask the audience, who would you rather work with? And about half of the room will say, I could not stand Pat Flynn, not because he doesn't seem like a good guy, but he'd be boring and quiet. I need somebody who's in my face like Gary Vaynerchuk. The other half of the room raises their hands and says, I don't want somebody swearing at me and yelling at me. I want somebody who's kind and relaxed and, who they are, just easygoing and a teacher. I would take Pat Flynn. At the end of that, I show the audience how successful both of them are. My point being that because of who they are, they attract, as Chris Ducker says, they attract the best and repel the rest. They attract who's best for them. And that's really what a personal brand is about letting people know who you are and what you stand for. And you from a professional standpoint, some of the things that you're interested in, some of the things that you value, and I would argue, from a personal standpoint as well, to connect with people. Because most of the quality connections we make long-term are based off of small little idiosyncratic things like you have a black lab. I love labs. I've got 2 labs. Because of that, I knew right away we had something in common. Sometimes you'll see this where you're walking down the street or you're at a conference or something and you love the Avengers, for example, and 1 out of the 100 people in the room has an Avengers shirt on. 9 times out of 10, what are you going to do? You're going to walk over and feel more comfortable talking to that person saying, hey, I love this character too, because they're giving these little social signals that let you know what they're interested, what they stand for. Laptop stickers, all those types of things are little visual indicators. And that's where letting people know online what you are about. And it doesn't have to be a big in your face. It can be very, very subtle. Like I said, I've coached people who are literally PhD nuclear scientists on this topic. But by giving little signals, it allows people to connect with you and get to know you as a person. That's the personal part of personal branding, is who you are as a person, and letting people know who that is. And that allows for opportunities to make connections initially through a digital space that can go analog. And that's why I'm so passionate about helping people know how to do that in a real way. Because when you do that in a real way, you connect with people you really enjoy being with. You find work that you really, really enjoy doing. And suddenly you become much more excited and enthusiastic about what you're doing and life in general, that it extends into other areas. And I know for some people that's like a little bit kumbaya, but that's really, I've seen that time and time again when people get to know who that is and they embrace that. If I'm going to try to find out who DP Knudten is, what's the first thing I'm going to do?
Hit the Google.
Go to the source of all light, truth, and knowledge, right? The Google, and try to find out. And that profile, that what I find is going to be, or what, even if I don't find something, and I've had employers tell me this with my college students, that if they don't find something, they often get suspicious and they think that the person is hiding something. They want to know a little bit about who you are and some of the things you stand for. And I've made more great connections by talking about sports, dogs, little things that are personally interesting to me that have led to great business relationships. And that, again, is there's nothing false or contrived about that. Like the article was talking about. That's who I am and some of the things that I stand for.
Again, I invite you to check out fastcompany.com, look up You Are Not a Brand, read the article for what it is, make your own opinions, whatever. I love the fact that this writer had the guts to write something like this and provoke a reaction in me. And I really respect that, because it's forcing me to go through my positions and lay them out more concretely in my head. And I find value in that. I will point out what I think are some challenges in here. And I think you hit on one, which is quibbling about word choice. Aristotelian ethos, is that like modern branding? Well, in some ways it is. Is he also, the writer, conflating the Instagram influencer with a personal brand? I think he is in a big way.
Absolutely.
And I think I related this in a story in a previous episode where I was following my Instagram feed or whatever, Twitter, I think it was. And someone I follow said, so interesting to see a Instagram influencer, in quotes, on my flight next to me, posting a picture of herself in a leopard skin jumpsuit getting into a G5 private jet as she sits in the middle seat next to me going to New York.
Coach class.
Well, exactly. That's an Instagram influencer who's building a personal brand, but in the wrong way, in my personal opinion.
100%.
If you conflate the two together, That's like saying all chainsaws are bad because I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the movie.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great example because that was exactly what I thought is, I can think of multiple examples of bad, false, inauthentic personal branding or business branding. If you look at just those and then you say everybody who does personal brands or every personal brand is a bad one, I would say you're missing the point. Like you said, it's the spirit and how somebody is applying the concepts and principles. If they're doing it in a way where they're like that person in the middle seat on an airplane, they're trying to be something they're not to try to prove they have a life that they don't have. I mean, that's sad to me, but that's also not at all what you and I believe in.
Yeah.
What we believe in is that idea of, an ethos. I would argue too, getting to know who you are and your personal brand is also a continual process of discovery and thinking about, who am I and why am I here? I mean, you can, pull Shakespeare with the, to thine own self be true. That's a discovery process. But I think when you realize that you're doing it to learn who you are, not to impress somebody else, you're learning how to do it to share your gifts, talents, and skills with the world and help somebody else out. Not to say, hey, look at me, I'm the coolest person, smartest kid in the room. That's when you realize the value of a true personal brand. It's about service. It's about self-awareness. It's about being somebody who is content in who you are and what you're trying to do, and is always in a process of figuring out who you are and what you want to do and how you grow as a person. So, from a philosophical standpoint, it's, for me, that's a large part of what's missed when you get a simple article like that just says it's all bad. It's all bad. All chainsaws are bad.
And for all you all out there playing the DP Knudten drinking game, get your glasses ready because a true nonfiction personal brand is all about knowing who you are so you can be it. Yep. Have you done the work to figure out who you are and then go to the next phase, which is actually being who you are? We're going to talk about some more personal brands that we like, that we think are doing a fantastic job. We're going to talk a little bit more about Mark Schaefer's book, Marketing Rebellion, in the next episode with Don Stanley. Oh, by the way, I think I should probably introduce you. This is Don Stanley of the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Life Sciences Communication Department. You're an instructor in social media.
Yep. Been a faculty member going on 20 years and introduced the first social media class in 2008 on campus, and have been a digital marketing consultant running my own consultancy for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
I hate to say.
Well, there you go. I mean, because everybody thinks that social media is this new flashy thing. It's been around. And I'll point again to a fantastic article by Tom Peters about personal branding that was in Fast Company back when it was primarily a print magazine. It came out in the August issue of 1997, which I owned and I read. It's an article called The Brand Called You, and it's Tom Peters' concept of personal branding laid out in the first time to a general audience. So check that out on fastcompany.com, and also check out You Are Not a Brand on fastcompany.com, because I think you get a great counterpoint conversation between, are you a personal brand? Are you not a personal brand? It's the nuances that make all the difference, and that's a lot of what we talk about here on the Nonfiction Brand podcast and Nonfiction Brandversity, the free Facebook group that I invite you to join. So once again, I'm DP Knudten, and he is
Don Stanley.
And we'll talk to you next week with more ranting about this article and what personal branding is and is not. Bye-bye.